Most people think empaths are weak. They think kindness means softness. They think patience means submission. They think silence means fear. But what they never realize is that the most terrifying person in the room is often the empath who has finally had enough. Because an empath does not become dark overnight. It happens slowly, painfully, quietly, after years of betrayal, years of being used, years of carrying emotions nobody else could survive. See, the dangerous thing about an empath is this. They understand human nature better than most people understand themselves. They know when you are lying before you speak. They feel fake energy before words even leave your mouth. They notice disrespect hidden inside jokes. They can sense manipulation behind fake smiles, but they stay quiet. Not because they are blind, because they still hope people will choose honesty. That is the mistake people make with empaths. They confuse mercy with weakness. And eventually, the empath stops explaining, stops forgiving, stops chasing, stops caring. That is the moment everything changes. Because when a dark empath is born, they no longer react emotionally. They become cold, strategic, unreachable. The same person who once cried over disrespect now walks away without a word. And that silence, it terrifies people. Because nobody expects the healer to become emotionally untouchable. You see, empaths spend their whole lives absorbing pain. They absorb trauma from family, energy from toxic friends, pressure from relationships, disappointment from people they sacrificed everything for. And one day, their soul reaches a limit, a dangerous limit. That's when the empath realizes something shocking. Not everyone deserves my heart. And once they understand that, their entire personality transforms. The scary part is, they still understand emotions deeply. But now, they use that understanding differently. They can read manipulation instantly. They can predict behavior. They can expose fake people without effort. They know exactly what hurts someone, because they spent years understanding pain itself. But unlike before, they no longer feel guilty for protecting themselves. That's why people become terrified after losing a real empath. Because they realize too late, the empath they destroyed is no longer soft. Now they have boundaries. Now they have emotional control. Now they see through every mask instantly. And suddenly, the people who once ignored the empath begin chasing them. But it's too late. Because once an empath emotionally detaches, you are no longer speaking to the same person. You are speaking to someone rebuilt from suffering. Someone who learned that kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Most men cannot handle this transformation in a female empath. At first they love her depth, her attention, her loyalty, her emotional intelligence. But eventually, they become uncomfortable. Because a female empath sees everything. She notices energy shifts. She notices emotional inconsistency. She notices when effort disappears. She notices when love becomes manipulation. The most dangerous empath is not the loud one, not the angry one, not the emotional one. The most dangerous empath is the one who finally stops caring. Because before that moment, they cared too much. Too much about people's feelings. Too much about saving relationships. Too much about fixing broken people who never wanted to heal. They gave chances nobody deserved. They forgave lies they never should have tolerated. They stayed loyal while being emotionally destroyed in silence. And the terrifying part is, they did all of this while nobody noticed the damage happening inside them. That is how an empath suffers, quietly. While everyone else sleeps peacefully, the empath is replaying conversations in their head, wondering where they went wrong. While everyone else moves on easily, the empath is carrying emotional wounds for years. They absorb pain like a sponge. Family pain, relationship pain, childhood pain, the hidden sadness inside other people. And because they naturally understand emotions deeply, they often become emotional targets for toxic people. Manipulators love empaths. Because empaths listen, empaths forgive. Empaths try to understand even the people hurting them. That is why so many empaths spend years trapped in one-sided relationships. They keep hoping people will change. But one day, something inside the empath breaks permanently. Not loudly, silently. After the 1000th disappointment, after the 1000th betrayal, after sacrificing their peace for people who never appreciated it, the empath becomes exhausted. Not physically, spiritually. And once an empath becomes spiritually exhausted, something terrifying happens. They stop reacting emotionally. The same person who once begged for honesty now watches lies without even responding. The same person who once cried themselves to sleep now feels numb. The same person who once chased people to fix problems now walks away without warning. And people do not know how to handle this version of the empath, because they were comfortable with the empath being emotional. They were comfortable with the empath forgiving everything. They were comfortable with having unlimited access to the empath's heart. But now, that door is closed forever. And suddenly the people who ignored the empath begin panicking. Why? Because they can feel the emotional distance. They can feel the energy disappearing. The empath who once answered instantly now leaves messages unread. The empath who once cared deeply now responds with cold silence. The empath who once over-explained themselves now says only one sentence: "I'm done." That sentence terrifies people more than screaming ever could, because when an empath reaches that point, there is usually no return. People think empaths are weak because they are kind. But kindness is not weakness. Real weakness is hurting people just because you can. An empath chooses kindness even after experiencing pain most people could never survive. That is strength. But when that strength gets abused for too long, it transforms into emotional detachment. And emotional detachment inside an empath is dangerous because they already understand human psychology deeply. They know what people fear. They know what people hide. They know what insecurities people pretend not to have. But before, they used that understanding to protect people. Now, they use it to protect themselves. That changes everything. Because once an empath stops caring, they stop tolerating disrespect instantly. No more endless explanations. No more emotional begging. No more sacrificing themselves just to keep others comfortable. They become calm. And calmness after emotional suffering is terrifying, especially when it comes from someone who used to care endlessly. People expect empaths to keep forgiving forever. They expect unlimited patience, unlimited understanding, unlimited emotional labor. But nobody realizes that even the softest heart has a breaking point. And when an empath reaches that breaking point, they become emotionally unreachable. That is the moment toxic people lose control over them. Because manipulation only works on someone who still emotionally reacts. Once the empath no longer reacts, the manipulator becomes powerless. That is why toxic people often become obsessed after losing an empath. Not because they loved them deeply, because they lost access to someone pure, someone loyal, someone emotionally rare, someone who genuinely cared. And deep down, they know they will never find that energy again. That realization destroys people internally, especially when they watch the empath become stronger without them. Because the empath who stops caring starts transforming rapidly. They stop seeking validation, stop fearing rejection, stop trying to prove their worth. And suddenly, they become magnetic. Not because they changed who they are, because they finally stopped abandoning themselves for others. That energy is powerful. People can feel it instantly. The empath becomes quieter but stronger, softer but untouchable, calmer but emotionally dangerous. Because now they see manipulation immediately. Now they recognize fake apologies. Now they recognize empty promises. Now they recognize people who only return when they need something. And once an empath sees the truth clearly, they can never unsee it. That is why the coldest people are often former empaths. Not because they were born heartless, because life forced them to learn painful lessons repeatedly. Every betrayal taught them something. Every heartbreak awakened something. Every disappointment removed another layer of innocence. Until eventually, the empath realizes a brutal truth. Some people never loved them. They only loved the access they had to their energy. That realization changes the empath forever. Because once they understand that, they stop giving themselves away freely. Their trust becomes rare. Their attention becomes valuable. Their presence becomes earned. And suddenly, people who once ignored them start chasing them desperately. But the empath no longer cares the same way. That is the terrifying part. Not revenge, not anger, not hatred. Indifference. Because nothing scares people more than losing emotional control over someone they thought would always stay. Especially when that person was once deeply attached to them. And the empath remembers everything. Every moment they cried alone. Every moment they felt unappreciated. Every moment they were emotionally abandoned while still giving love. Those memories harden them slowly. Not into a cruel person, into a protected person. A person who finally understands that protecting their peace is more important than saving. toxic relationships. That realization creates a completely different type of empath. One who no longer fears walking away. One who no longer fears loneliness. One who no longer confuses suffering with love. And once an empath reaches that level, they become emotionally unstoppable. Because now they understand their value. Now they understand their presence was never ordinary. Now they understand why toxic people wanted to keep them emotionally trapped. Because genuine empathy is rare in this world. Real loyalty is rare. Real emotional depth is rare. Real understanding is rare. And people only realize the value of an empath after destroying them. But by then, it is too late. Because the empath who finally stops caring is not the same person anymore. That version died during the pain. What rises afterward is someone far more powerful. Someone who still has a heart, but no longer allows others to weaponize it against them. Someone who still feels deeply, but refuses to drown in other people's chaos anymore. Someone who finally learned the difference between love and self-destruction. A dark empath sees through every mask. That is what makes them terrifying. Not because they are evil, not because they want revenge, not because they enjoy hurting people, but because they understand human nature at a level most people never will. An empath notices things nobody else notices. The change in someone's tone, the fake smile that hides resentment, the forced laugh covering jealousy, the silence that secretly contains anger. While everyone else listens to words, the empath studies energy. That is why lying to an empath feels uncomfortable, because deep down, people know the empath can feel something is wrong, even when there is no proof yet. And the scary part is, most empaths ignore their intuition in the beginning. Not because they are blind, because they want to believe in people. They want to believe the excuses. They want to believe the promises. They want to believe the love is real, so they keep giving chances. Again, and again, and again, even while their soul quietly warns them. But every betrayal sharpens the empath's vision. Every lie trains them. Every manipulation awakens them. Every heartbreak teaches them how people truly operate, until one day, their intuition becomes almost impossible to fool. That is when the empath becomes dangerous, because now they stop listening to words completely. They watch patterns, and patterns never lie. A manipulator can fake emotions for a moment. A narcissist can fake kindness temporarily. A toxic person can pretend to change for a few weeks. But patterns always expose the truth eventually, and a dark empath becomes obsessed with patterns. They notice inconsistency instantly. They notice emotional distance instantly. They notice hidden intentions instantly. Before someone even speaks, the empath already feels the shift. That level of awareness scares people, especially fake people, because fake people survive by wearing masks. Masks of kindness, masks of loyalty, masks of innocence. But an awakened empath sees directly through the performance. They notice when someone compliments them with hidden envy. They notice when someone acts supportive but secretly competes with them. They notice when someone apologizes only because they fear losing control. Nothing escapes the empath forever, and that becomes terrifying after the empath stops doubting themselves. Because for years, most empaths question their instincts. They think maybe they are overthinking, maybe they are too emotional. Maybe they are imagining things. That self-doubt keeps them trapped. But once enough betrayals happen, the empath finally trusts their intuition completely. That changes everything. Now they stop explaining what they feel. They simply observe, quietly. And silence from a dark empath is dangerous, because silence means they are studying everything. They study reactions, body language, emotional inconsistencies, micro-expressions, hidden motives. People think intelligence is about education, but emotional intelligence is a completely different level of power, and empaths master it naturally. That is why some people become nervous around empaths without understanding why. Because the empath's presence feels exposing. You cannot fake energy around someone who feels emotions deeply. Eventually, the mask cracks. Eventually, the truth leaks out, and the empath notices, always. That is why manipulators often call empaths crazy or too sensitive, because exposing the truth threatens them. Toxic people hate emotionally aware individuals, because emotionally aware people cannot be controlled easily. You cannot gaslight someone who recognizes emotional manipulation instantly. You cannot emotionally confuse someone who studies behavior patterns deeply. And once the empath evolves into a dark empath, they stop giving warnings. That is the terrifying part. Before, they explained everything. Before, they tried to communicate endlessly. Before, they begged people to understand them. But now, they simply detach. The moment they sense fake energy, they emotionally pull away. No arguments, no drama, no emotional speeches, just distance, cold distance. And that sudden emotional withdrawal shocks people, because most people never expected the empath to leave. They thought the empath would tolerate everything forever, but the dark empath no longer seeks emotional closure. They seek peace. That shift changes their entire personality. Now they protect their energy aggressively, not with anger, with awareness. Awareness becomes the empath's greatest weapon, because awareness reveals truth faster than words ever can. A dark empath can sit in a room and instantly sense tension nobody else notices. They can feel hidden jealousy, hidden attraction, hidden resentment, hidden dishonesty, and the more pain they survive, the stronger this ability becomes. Suffering sharpens their emotional instincts. That is why so many deeply wounded empaths become emotionally unreadable themselves, because they learned how dangerous vulnerability can be in the wrong hands. Now they reveal less, trust less, speak less, but they observe everything, and people underestimate quiet observers constantly. That is their biggest mistake, because the person speaking the least is often understanding the most. A dark empath becomes terrifying because they stop reacting emotionally, while still understanding emotions perfectly. That combination creates emotional power. Imagine someone who understands manipulation completely, but no longer feels emotionally controlled by it. Imagine someone who understands guilt tactics, but refuses to feel guilty anymore. Imagine someone who sees through lies instantly, but stays calm instead of reacting. That emotional discipline is intimidating, especially to toxic people. Because toxic people depend on emotional reactions. They depend on confusion, depend on guilt, depend on emotional chaos. But the dark empath becomes emotionally clear, and clarity destroys manipulation. That is why people often become obsessed with dark empaths after losing them, because the empath understood them more deeply than anyone else ever did, even their flaws, especially their flaws, and yet the empath still chose to love them once. That kind of acceptance is rare, but once the empath sees repeated betrayal, that acceptance disappears forever. The scary thing about a dark empath is this: they know exactly who you are, not the version you show publicly, not the image you try to maintain, not the personality you perform online. The real you, the insecure you, the jealous you, the manipulative you, the broken you. And the empath sees all of it without needing explanations. That level of perception makes people uncomfortable. Because human beings spend most of their lives hiding pain, hiding fear, hiding selfishness, hiding insecurity. But dark empaths force people to feel emotionally exposed, even in silence. And once an empath masters emotional detachment, their intuition becomes even stronger. Because emotions no longer cloud their judgment. Now they trust energy immediately. Now they leave at the first red flag. Now they stop romanticizing potential. Now they stop trying to rescue emotionally unavailable people. That maturity transforms them into something powerful, something calm, something disciplined, something emotionally untouchable. And toxic people cannot survive around emotionally untouchable individuals, because manipulation requires emotional access. The moment the empath removes emotional access, the toxic person loses power completely. That is why some people become angry after losing an empath. Not because they lost control of a relationship, because they lost control of someone's emotions. And nothing frustrates manipulators more than realizing the empath can no longer be emotionally reached. No guilt works anymore. No fake apology works anymore. No emotional games work anymore. The empath sees through everything instantly now. That is the terrifying evolution of a dark empath. A person who once ignored red flags because of love now notices deception before the first lie fully forms. A person who once gave endless chances now walks away after the first betrayal. A person who once sacrificed themselves to keep others happy now protects their peace like their life depends on it. Because they learned the hardest lesson of all: not everyone deserves access to a pure heart to a faith. The empath's transformation creates fear in others. Because nobody expects the kindest person to become emotionally unreachable. People expect strength from cold people. They expect distance from selfish people. They expect emotional walls from those who never cared. But when a deeply loving empath changes, it shocks everyone around them. Because nobody notices how much pain an empath hides behind their kindness. Nobody sees the nights they cried silently. Nobody sees the emotional exhaustion. Nobody sees how many times they forgave things that shattered them internally. People only notice the empath's warmth, the smile, the patience, the understanding, and they begin assuming it will last forever. That is where the destruction begins. Because the world often treats empaths like emotional oxygen. Everyone takes from them attention, comfort, support, energy, understanding. And the empath keeps giving because loving people feels natural to them, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. That is why empaths attract broken people constantly. People feel safe around them. People feel understood around them. People feel emotionally accepted around them. But many of those same people never stop to ask one important question. Who heals the empath? Who listens to the person always listening to others? Who saves the person always saving everyone else? Most of the time, nobody. And eventually the empath realizes something heartbreaking. The people they sacrifice themselves for would never sacrifice the same way for them. That realization changes everything inside them, because pain changes people. But disappointment changes them even deeper. Pain can heal. Disappointment rewrites your entire understanding of human beings. And once an empath becomes deeply disappointed enough times, their entire energy transforms. Not loudly, quietly. The empath who once entered rooms full of warmth now enters silently. The empath who once trusted easily now studies everyone carefully. The empath who once overgave emotionally now protects every piece of their energy. People notice this shift immediately, and it makes them uncomfortable. Because suddenly the empath is no longer emotionally available on command. Now there are boundaries. Now there is distance. Now there is emotional discipline. And toxic people hate boundaries more than rejection. Because boundaries expose entitlement. The moment an empath starts saying no, people reveal their true character instantly. Some become angry. Some become manipulative. Some become guilt-driven. Some suddenly call the empath selfish. But the truth is, the empath is finally treating themselves with the love they gave everyone else freely. That transformation terrifies people who benefited from the empath's self-neglect. Because the empath used to tolerate everything: disrespect, mixed signals, emotional inconsistency, broken promises. But now, the empath notices everything immediately. And once they notice it, they detach emotionally faster than anyone expects. That sudden detachment shocks people deeply, because they still remember the old empath. The empath who fought for relationships endlessly. The empath who over-explained their feelings. The empath who stayed loyal no matter how much pain they experienced. But that version no longer exists. Pain killed that version slowly. Now the empath has evolved into someone emotionally aware and emotionally guarded at the same time. That combination creates fear in people, especially fake people. Because fake people survive through emotional access. They survive through manipulation, through confusion, through guilt, through emotional dependency. But a transformed empath cannot be manipulated the same way anymore. Now they recognize the patterns instantly. They recognize love bombing, recognize gaslighting, recognize emotional inconsistency, recognize fake apologies designed only to regain access. And instead of reacting emotionally, they simply disconnect. That calm disconnection terrifies people, because most individuals expect emotional reactions. They expect arguments, expect tears, expect emotional breakdowns. But when the empath responds with silence instead, it forces people to confront themselves, and many people cannot handle that mirror. That is why losing an empath often creates panic later. Not immediately. At first, people think the empath will come back. They think the empath's love is unconditional forever. They think another apology will fix everything. But then reality hits. The calls become shorter. The energy disappears. The emotional warmth vanishes completely. And suddenly, people realize they lost someone irreplaceable. Not because empaths are perfect, because genuine emotional depth is rare, very rare. A real empath gives people a feeling most never experience anywhere else. feeling understood, feeling emotionally safe, feeling deeply seen, feeling accepted without pretending. And once that energy disappears, the emptiness becomes unbearable. That is when fear begins. Because people realize the empath was never weak. The empath was choosing love despite the pain. And choosing love in a cruel world requires enormous strength. But now the empath no longer gives endless access to their heart. Now access must be earned. That change creates fear, because people can no longer predict or control the empath, emotionally, especially in relationships. Most men are not prepared for what happens when a female empath transforms emotionally. At first, they are attracted to her softness, her nurturing energy, her emotional intelligence, but eventually, they become intimidated by how deeply she sees through them. Because a female empath notices emotional dishonesty instantly. She notices when effort changes, notices when words stop matching actions, notices when someone emotionally withdraws while pretending everything is normal. And once she becomes emotionally awakened, she stops ignoring those instincts. That is when many people lose her permanently, because a transformed empath no longer stays where peace is constantly disturbed. She no longer begs for honesty, no longer chases emotional consistency, no longer sacrifices herself to keep relationships alive alone. Instead, she becomes silent, and silence from an empath feels terrifying, because it means their emotions are shutting down permanently. People underestimate how dangerous emotional exhaustion can become. An exhausted empath stops arguing, stops proving themselves, stops trying to fix people, and when that happens, their entire energy changes. They become calmer, sharper, emotionally detached, not heartless, protected. That protection creates fear, because people can no longer emotionally drain them. Now the empath chooses who deserves their energy carefully. And many people fail that test, because most individuals love the empath's healing energy without ever protecting the empath in return. That selfishness becomes painfully obvious after the empath awakens emotionally. Now they see who only contacted them during loneliness, who only valued them during emotional crises, who only returned when they needed comfort or validation. The empath finally realizes they were being emotionally consumed, and once they realize that, they begin disappearing emotionally from people's lives. Not dramatically, quietly. They stop reaching out, stop overgiving, stop carrying relationships alone. And suddenly the people who once ignored them feel abandoned themselves. That irony is brutal. Because the empath spent years feeling emotionally abandoned while standing right beside people. Now those same people experience the emptiness they created. That is why the empath's transformation creates fear. Because it forces others to face consequences emotionally. The empath who once made everyone feel emotionally safe is now protecting themselves first. The empath who once tolerated chaos now walks away from it immediately. The empath who once feared losing people now fears losing their peace more. That evolution is powerful and terrifying, because once an empath truly learns their worth, they stop accepting relationships that require self-destruction. Now they understand that love without respect becomes emotional slavery. Now they understand that loyalty without boundaries becomes suffering. Now they understand that constantly saving others while abandoning yourself is not kindness. It is slow emotional suicide. That realization transforms the empath permanently. And the scariest part for other people? The empath becomes stronger in silence. No announcements, no revenge speeches, no dramatic exits, just emotional withdrawal. And once an empath emotionally withdraws completely, the warmth people depended on disappears forever. That absence haunts people deeply, because nothing is colder than a loving person who no longer feels emotionally connected to you. Nothing is scarier than watching someone who once cared endlessly look at you without emotional attachment anymore. That moment forces people to realize a painful truth. They destroyed the very person who loved them the most.